Hello, and welcome to another World of UX podcast. This is your host, Darren Hood. Thanks for taking the time to join us on today, and a special welcome to all of you who are joining us for the first time. We are continuing our extended anniversary celebration for the show, and so I'm just having some interviews, bringing some people on the show. Again, I love bringing different voices on the show so people can hear the different trains of thought, people can hear the different philosophical components, people can hear the different histories, the different track records, the different points of view. It's important to do that. One person never has it all. And so I like to take my platform and extend it to other people. And so we're doing it again today. Somebody else that I'm probably going to say some stuff he's never heard me say before. And I always shock people when I do this part, but I love being exposed to sharp people. I love it. When I find a sharp person, I'll go over in the equivalent of a corner and just sit there. And as some of us like to say, just turn my plate up and just take it in. And I love the perspectives. Even as we were warming up to get ready for the recording, I'm just taking all this stuff in. And to me, it's the sharpening of the saw. I don't want to be the smartest person in the room. I strive to make sure I'm not the smartest person in the room. I want to grow. And having somebody like this on the show is just another one of those opportunities for people out there. Those of you out there that are like me, you're going to love this because of what this person brings to the table. And to let him know, I'll give the name, but I will let him introduce himself and tell his story. To me, I have the one and the only Strat Parrott. Welcome to the show. Strat, feel free to tell the people who you are, sir.
Hey, Darren, thanks for having me on. As you said, I'm Strat Parrott, and with that unique name comes a backlog of history and interesting things that I've done with my life. I have always worked in design in various aspects for the last 20 plus years. And man, sometimes it's hard to say that and really hard to realize that it's been that long. I started in print with a passion for web and flash cards.
Ooh, yeah. Oh.
Not flashcards, not to be confused with flashcards, but with flash email holiday cards.
Oh my goodness.
Really to get those out to corporate clients in a time where people were transitioning from tools that no one has heard of or tools of yesteryear, Quark and Quark Express, into the now very popular Photoshop, Flash, Creative Suite, and so on. Over those 20 years, I've really been able to develop an expertise in applying physical to digital and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And kind of in that world, I've been able to do a lot of experiential design in physical spaces. I worked in museums with my own consultancy for about 15 years.
Wow.
And have recently come back into kind of the corporate work environment in this now new post-COVID work environment that we're all experiencing and learning about, and really came back into that to help some legacy organizations that focus on traditional in-person work, really be able to adapt into their mobile and online offerings.
Fantastic. So we're going to get into a little bit of that history. And I know people who hear the show already know some of these initial questions I'm going to ask, and then we're going to move our way eventually toward talking about some of the broader sort of wild card kind of topics. But okay, so Strat, you let the people know who you are. You've given people a little bit about your history. But how was it exactly did you get into UX? People love hearing everybody's origin story. So what was Strat's origin story?
Oh, man. So my origin story is very close to this Japanese idea of shoshin, which is I love to approach everything as a beginner, right? So really, I knew from a pretty early age that I wanted to take my background in arts and mixed media and not be a starving artist. Little did I know that 20 years later, who knows what's going on in the industry today. But the vision that gave me at the time was one in moving from art to graphic design, which was my first step. Within graphic design, I had some really early experience from my grandfather to computers in the very early days, IRC chat, regular HTML websites, pre-GeoCities, things that kids listening to you today have never even heard of. They don't even know what weird language I'm speaking. And really was able to focus on that through some of my other passions as a 6 or 7 year old, being able to access the internet in the early 90s to really be able to pull some fandoms over. I loved comic books. I loved history and astrology and connecting with people across cultures. And so really that passion took me to learning how to navigate around the internet, use it as a tool for communication, use it as a tool to expand what not only I was able to experience, but what others were able to experience as well. One of those things being some Japanese anime as we know today, or Japanese cartoons. That probably the first website that I built in 1995 or 96. And I don't know that what I would even call it a website. It was like an HTML page with some pictures on it and some blinky things to promote a cartoon that is now worldly famous and very popular, with a bunch of scouts that turn into super heroines and save the earth from people named after gems and crystals. So all of that kind of brought me through this, knowing what I wanted to be, which was a graphic designer or a designer. I really didn't specify or think in my mind that there was any difference. At this time, there was no real labels. Graphic design was about it, right? Moving through graphic design and into high school, I found out about some of these organizations that we have, professional organizations that existed, like the Art Directors Guild and AIGA, which have now either gone away or are on the last ditch efforts of survival, I think. But at that time, I really wanted to take and pull my experience over and show that I wasn't just that family member that could fix their computer, right? I could make things. I could help people communicate, visualize what they were doing. I could kind of go transmedia with it. So I could go from something printed to a video to a website, and eventually to apps and other things. But this kind of cross-channel focus and excitement really just led me into the world of user experience that was not labeled as such at the time.
Right.
We were webmasters, we were web designers. People didn't even necessarily call themselves developers or web developers. You were just a programmer at that time,
right? Because
it was much less about libraries of scripts and all these things, and you were having to write code. So throughout this transitional period, it really just gave me a lot of different knowledge and experiences to be able to transition from really even the world of print into the digital world, and then kind of gave me the context of how do we expand that and pull it back.
That's some outstanding stuff. You bring back some memories for me too. I don't know why you said all that, and I started thinking about Hot Metal Pro and things like that when I was scared to death of code back in the day. But you had to learn it. I mean, a little bit back then. There was no question.
And even now, like some of the legacy things that still pull forward outside of just your HTML and CSS type stuff is ActionScript. There's still a little bit of ActionScript that exists out there in the world, and labeled as different things these days. But knowing how those things work, not necessarily being one to do the code, although I had learned to code along with learning to do design work. Not just design strategy, not just design planning, but doing the build out of what's now like a front end designer or a front end web developer, allowed me to have that different perspective to be able to communicate with my now counterparts. We used to be much more together. Now we're kind of siloed, especially depending on the size of the organization or how it's structured. But that's allowed me to kind of be that universal translator as a design leader between my product teams, my developers, my business teams, and ultimately designers. So one thing that really taught me is that a lot of times throughout that communication, you don't even really talk about design. It's really about the decisions that you're able to make and the speed to decisions and how you're able to enable that decision making to happen more quickly. Sometimes that's through a prototype, being able to see it. Sometimes that can be through a flow chart or a map or really just visualizing something. Elsewise, a lot of your stakeholders, your business partners, they tend to talk around a problem before they really get to visualizing it. And because oftentimes they are not visual people themselves. And so they do it in the best way they can. They use the tools at their fingertips. Sometimes it's a spreadsheet that's just like the most epic spreadsheet you've ever seen that I'm impressed by. I can't do that spreadsheet, but I can take that spreadsheet. I can take those business requirements and mash them up with quantitative research and qualitative research and really build that picture of what a user or a customer wants and needs to have a conversation much more quickly about what it is that we're building instead of a lot of assumptions and a lot of speculation.
Yeah. And you just remind me of how, and people will grow into this, but you just remind me of the importance of the versatility that we need, because there's a lot of the term I would use to refer to this. We have a very narrow point of view when we first come into the discipline, and we tend to think of it as we're only going to do this one thing, but there's so many other things that we can do to help accomplish the end goal. And being versatile in how we communicate, being versatile is how we approach the work. Those are the things that come to mind as you mentioned that, because people just want to, especially today, you just want to come in with your Figma and you want to save the day. You want to fly in with Figma and save the day. Like, there's a lot of things that need to be done, and teams operate differently. You have people at different, I love talking about maturity levels. You have people that are operating at different, not only UX maturity levels, but people operating at different business maturity levels, which nobody really talks about. And so it's important to try to learn to be as versatile, to be as flexible as you can. That's going to help with the overall collaboration that takes place. You're not just going to come in with your tool and fly into town and save the day and fly back out. It's simply not going to work. So just encouraging people to remember, you're going to be versatile. You're going to have to wing it sometimes. It's not going to be, so many people try to teach folks to just come in and follow a process. And even when you're trying to follow a process, I'm reminded of this also, you try to follow a process a lot of times, and you're trying to follow these steps. You're trying to check boxes, and you find out sometime that there's a box that you didn't know needed to be checked in that process. So just important to be versatile and to be flexible. That you just remind me of that and mentioning things like that.
Yeah, I think one thing that pulls me to is thinking about this idea of versatility, right? And how can we take the foundational knowledge and learning that we have today and move it through different industries, different disciplines even, but using these same tools. And I think that some of the challenge today might be that I could make the blanket statement and say, we once went by the book. When we were younger, we went by the book. We're by the books. There was a lot of them. You've got a great library of books and resources that are foundational tools that you can look at things and there's very minimal updates that necessarily need to be made to some of the books. Some of them need a lot of updates, some more so than others. But today, it's not by the book; it's by the boot camp, right? Which is even less. So, like, how quickly can we transfer this knowledge and get it over to someone in a digestible and consumable way that can make me money? And oftentimes, what happens there is a lot of the actual process and critical thinking falls to the wayside. So you don't learn how to really be adaptable, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
the adaptation and adaptability really comes from time, and a depth and breadth of knowledge. At this point in my career, I've probably forgotten more methodologies and pseudo laws and things like that, or theories,
Yeah.
than I could even name. And even though some of them hold true, most of my counterparts, most of my peers, in the business side of things, they don't care if you come to them and say,
Right.
"Oh, well, we did this because of Fitts law," or "Oh, that's a insert methodology thing here," or you start talking about design thinking and most of them shut down and don't listen anyway because they want solutions, right? So designers today, even some of us, and when I say some of us, I mean older practitioners, those of us who've been around for a while, we often want to start with, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Help me understand what you are trying to learn. Business side, business partners, your MBA counterparts, they aren't necessarily coming to you at that level wanting to, or even necessarily understanding yet how to articulate the problem that they want to solve. They want solutions. So they almost, when they come to or interact with any flavor of design or product or whatever, they're more in this expectation of the ideation piece. Like they want you to have some ideas that they can approve or deny, and then move on with the decision. Or, as I think a lot of us experience at various levels, they want validation of their own idea.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And where it becomes problematic is when we apply our very well known methods and practices to look at this question that they've posed. And if it gets invalidated, it can potentially cause political and environmental challenges within a team, right? So when something is like that occurs, how do you really come back with your knowledge and with your experience and shift that discussion? That's not something that you learn in a book, frankly. That's not something that you learn, definitely not something you learn in a boot camp. And it's something that takes a lot of time to be able to develop that sense of, one, when asked a question. Even today, I had something that came in from a coworker, and they wanted a quick answer to validate something very specific, and wanted to know if one of the voice of the customer programs we had would foot the bill. Well, it depends. And yes, it kind of does. Answer the question that they were asking that was very specific. However, we had to reframe and rephrase the question a little bit to identify the same thing, but tell the story in a different way. And that was really about crafting the message from the stakeholder through to the research, and then how that's going to manifest into something that they can take and do that's actionable, that my team is not directly responsible for. Like, we were directly responsible for the research side, the insight, and answering the question quickly, as well as giving some recommendations of, here's some things you could do with this information that we've provided. But it's ultimately up to that other business team or product team to be able to like move it forward and execute on it. So.
Yeah. Yeah, dynamite stuff. I mean, and this is part of what we like to address on this show. There's much more to doing UX work than the stereotypical approaches and the things that you'll see in a lot of these cookie cutter types of addresses. And do people spend time talking about how to navigate the politics of the world? I just shared that book last week. I love that book. Talks about navigating the politics of UX. That book probably doesn't even sell a lot, but that's some groundbreaking, critical, life-saving, sleep-saving stuff that we need to know. And the stuff you were just talking about, these are the things that come up. And if you're not careful, you'll come face to face with it, and then you don't know what to do. Now you're deer in the headlights. So we like to share and talk about this kind of stuff for that reason, because I don't want people to run into, know the pothole is there and know how to go around it, instead of finding the pothole and having to double back, but you don't have time to double back sometimes. So we try to share this stuff.
That kind of makes me think of like two important things, right? So like, especially with so many people coming out of some of these different learning experiences, right? I'm not going to throw every learning experience out there into the boot camp flavor or under the bus. There's some really good learning experiences out there, both fully academic, both in person, your experience. Even some of the boot camps are actually okay. Maybe one or two of them. But the big to be able to take out of all of that is really your own personal drive. And I think one thing that I have seen is that those young designers that maybe don't get a user experience job, but figure out a way to turn themselves into a resource of value and not into a tool themselves.
Yes.
That's probably kind of two big flavors, right? Like, so you're going to go out with an entrepreneurial streak and say, I'm going to freelance. Well, you're either going to be a tool of someone else's vision, or you're going to develop some vision yourself.
Yes.
There's actually like a young guy from Nigeria who comes to mind that we've all talked to several times. He's come around many of from your UX chats to some of these other groups, and he's doing some really cool things with Webflow. Like, he's building tools and
know what you're talking about.
and doing these doing these really cool things, and that enabled him to be able to get a job. But he's doing more stuff, I think, on the surface with these little side projects and things. Well, all of that to get me to this point I'm trying to make, which is that having that go for it attitude, that entrepreneurial spirit, really means like how you're going to look at and adapt yourself to a situation and be able to learn more. So these entrepreneurial spirited, not just freelancers being the tool, but those who are creating value, not just extracting it, are more poised to be learning about business, because they are having to learn business.
Yes.
And how to make money while doing the thing that they love. They may find, as I did after like 15 years of running an agency, I was spending more time on business than the thing that I loved. Eventually, I grew to love the business side of things and to be able to do the thing that I loved, which was design and create and build things that people found useful. But that entrepreneurial piece is really something that enables them to be able to talk to their business counterparts. And rather than learning code today, I would say designers need to learn business. And that doesn't mean go out and get an MBA. It could for some people, but it means being able to learn the language of business.
Yes.
It's much more nuanced and how it works as an engine of communication.
Yes.
It's all different levels of communication.
Absolutely.
And that's what's going to, enable you to articulate your design vision, your choices, and all of these things And you're almost never going to be able to come at it and go like, oh, I read the book and it said, start with your mission and your vision and your values. And then after we do that, we'll be able to align stakeholders to we can align them up to the vision and mission and values of not only my design organization, but into those of the business. And that'll help everybody sing kumbaya. And I'll be able to do the work that needs to be done and solve the right problems.
Mm-hmm.
It just won't happen. But if you pull in those early stage designers, those people who've been in the entrepreneurial place or been a business owner or worked in corporate for long enough, they will have adapted and be able to speak business. So like as I think about it, and I work on strategy, on the strategy side at a higher level of UX in customer experience, the way that I pull that and weave that throughout the organization I'm currently with and my previous clients is that I try in many respects to not talk about design at all. I'm designing with people. I'm building ideas. We are pulling those insights through and making them actionable. You know, there's the little phrase insights to action that gets used a lot. Sometimes that doesn't mean a whole lot. But really how you're able to pull a data point into a decision point.
Yep.
Because not all decisions can come from a data point, and not all data points have insights.
Yep.
So
absolutely,
you really have to be able to adapt and turn those around. Otherwise, it's like this idea that everything is a statistic, and there's two great lies that the devil told, and one of them is statistics. And I'll know the other one, but lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? So they can really tell any message that someone's trying to get across, but where you really are able to take data and turn it into an insight, like what does that mean? Like how do you really take that, get it into field work, get it to your other partners, and enable them to make decisions? Because it's not just giving them a dashboard that says, 68% of people prefer X, or the NPS score is 90 or whatever. Like that doesn't really tell them what to do next. It doesn't tell them if it's a good metric. It doesn't give them a benchmark. Like even if there's a benchmark on the dashboard, is that better than do I need to look at it month over month? Do I need to look at it year over year? How do I know what's important? But when you can take that and make it personable, I think there's a lot of this idea that we're told as designers is go out and tell a story, develop a narrative. Well, that doesn't mean what a lot of us, I believe, what people interpret that to mean. It doesn't mean go out and create just a complete narrative and write it out like a story with a hero and all this stuff. You use storytelling methods to take those numbers and get them to a place for someone else where they can then make a decision. That's the ultimate goal, right? So like, if I use the example of sailing and I said, Darren, I'm going to put a dashboard up for sailors and it's just going to tell us about the weather. So it says today, 50 knot winds. And I go to look at that. I'm like, okay, I'm an inexperienced sailor. I don't know like really what that means. Like 50 knots, is that too fast? Is that bad? I don't know. So that's a data point. My second data point that informs it a little bit more is going to be 50 knot winds, small craft advisory. Okay, well, I know that some type of boat that's considered a small craft like probably shouldn't be out today. Well, I have a 50-foot sailboat. Is that a small craft? Is that a big craft? What does that mean? And it's a sailboat, so wind could be problematic, right? Well, so as we build more context to that, we're telling the story.
Mm-hmm. Right.
50 knot winds, small craft advisory, craft under 22 feet, like don't go out. Okay, so now I know that I might be all right, but these types of other boats or watercraft may not uh, really be pertinent. But you're kind of building that story,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not saying, uh, one morning there was a sailboat that went out on the sea, and the wind was so rough that it capsized the boat. Like, that might be impactful. That might give you a story, but it doesn't really tie those things together, which is
Right.
the data to an
Right.
insight. Well, like, what is the actual insight from that? Do not take out a boat that is smaller than 22 feet because
Mm-hmm.
it is dangerous. Now, I'm not a sailor, so I probably gave not even enough right information in my example. And that in itself, I think, highlights the importance of also understanding a bit of the industry you're in. I can learn about boats, I can learn about boating to make that right, to make those assumptions more correct, or less ambiguous. But unless I know how to really take those foundational tools, like just your insights gathering, your data gathering, and pull those together, I'm not really going to be fit to be able to give any kind of answers. You're just giving another data point, and if you're just creating data points, then with nothing that you can do with them, then you're not really
Mm-hmm.
adding value to your customers, your user, or the business.
Yes.
So you've got to be able to transition those into a strategic output. And
Yes.
it's probably not a screen. It's probably not a button. I think buttons are underutilized and misrepresented in so many cases. So I always use them as an example. But
You mentioned a couple of things in that segment, and we're going to combine them as we sort of drifted into our at large topics, and so I want to sort of capitalize on that. You mentioned CX and UX together, and you also mentioned UX strategy. So
mhm.
tell the people a little bit about how you work. I know you mentioned that to me, that you approach the work from a CX perspective, and that CX means different things to different company. I think you actually mentioned that earlier too. But talk to the listeners about how you work in conjunction with CX as a UX professional, and what that strategic element is. I think some folks would like to hear more about that. Not too many of us talk about strategy these days. And as a person, I've been practicing CX or UX from a CX perspective since 2015, 2014, 2015. So I like that's broader picture, and I know that it applies outside of the digital, but some people, they want to hear somebody else talk about this, I'm sure.
Yeah. So to me, and I would also say to many UX practitioners, that the practice of UX is um, transactional in nature at the user level. So it's kind of one to one. How does somebody pull through an experience? And then how do you ramp that up to make it kind of work for multiple users? What's the best case scenario? Blah, blah, blah. I see kind of that next level up as how do we make it better for all users across channels? And that's where kind of the CX piece comes in.
Mm-hmm.
So while I'm speaking a little bit ambiguously about that, it's because I have observed, after joining a CX function and working as a UX practitioner in CX, that CX itself, much like user experience, can manifest in a bunch of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So if you today went out to Google and you Googled customer experience, you want to learn more about what it is that I'm talking about, you're going to be met with a lot of things that are much more customer service focused. Even if you went out and looked for
Yep.
customer experience jobs to pull your UX um, discipline into, a lot of times those are going to be in contact centers. They're going to be on the phone talking with people, and they're labeled as customer experience. That's one facet of customer experience. That's one listening channel. But the reason why that one is so prevalent is because you have so many either SaaS companies, single product or product suite companies that do not have brick and mortar locations. They don't have a customer to a person interaction that doesn't happen on the phone. Once upon a time, they'd have fewer cross-channel or omni-channel engagements. So now the contact center is often the holder of an omni-channel experience. So your phone agent is the same group or sometimes the same person that's answering your real-time chat. It's sometimes the same person that's answering the secure email inbox. It's someone in your customer contact center. So that's why it becomes synonymous with customer service. Now there's other CX that has the opposite problem. So it comes in like a lot of times in, say, the hospitality industry or different levels of retail service. And that customer experience group comes out of a sales team. So the sales team is looking at how they can enable more sales through understanding the customer. That's kind of sales 101, is understand what your customer needs and what their value is so that you can sell them something. There's that old Wolf of Wall Street sales thing, sell me this pen. New people will literally try and sell you the pen. Buy this pen, it writes so nice, it's so pretty, the weight is so good, it feels fantastic. But the experienced salesperson will solve a need for the customer. And so some customer experience teams pull out that way. And there's 5 or 6 other variations of how a CX group can come in. But ultimately, it's really looking across that holistic end-to-end experience for a client and how you would actually build that into your overall strategy and then pull that down into your user experience, whether that be a digital user experience or a physical user experience. My approach has always been to take it as something that's a whole. And really for my 20 years, I've almost never worked in a purely digital product driven company. I've almost always worked in hospitality, retail, finance and banking, insurance, somewhere where you have real people talking with real customers. And oftentimes in a physical location, be that an office building, a storefront, a banking center, or something of that nature. And all of those things have different pieces that allow you to pull through the different levels of strategy from the single sales interaction to the digital interaction or engagement that's happening from the marketing funnel all the way down through just how a person makes a decision once they're on a page. And back up, right? So those two things also quite often fall into this idea of operational improvement, process improvement, and those things all combined together are going to get us into service design.
Hi, everybody. That is all the time we have for today's segment of Talkin Shop. We will share the conclusion of my discussion with Strat Parrott on next week. Until then, we're going to wrap up. We hope you enjoyed the discussion that we had today and look forward to the great insights that Strat shared throughout the course of this entire conversation. I really enjoyed it and hope and trust that you did and will as well. But until next time, this is Darren Hood, the host of The World of UX, signing off. Happy UXing, everybody.